My name is Marisol Cade, and I fix engines for a living, which is a strange thing to put on a resume when half your customers don't have lungs. I've been on Dry Dock 7 for 6 years by the time the Volcaren flagship limped into our bay with its drive coil howling like a kettle that forgot how to stop. The Velker are tall, silver gray, built like they were drawn with a straight edge, and they do not, as a species, explain themselves. They hand you a manifest and a problem, and they walk away. That's the job. I don't mind it. I like machines because machines tell you the truth if you listen long enough. What I didn't expect was the Admiral. His name was Voss Therrell, and the whole dock had a theory about him before I ever laid eyes on him. The story went that 6 months earlier his Outrider squadron had been cut to pieces defending a colony nobody back home even remembered the name of, and that Therrell had walked off that battlefield without a scratch and without a word, and hadn't said more than a sentence at a time since. 3 fleet psychologists had rotated through trying to reach him. 2 senior officers had tried the direct approach, sit him down, order him to talk, soldier to soldier. A chaplain had tried scripture. He sat through all of it the way you'd sit through rain. Polite, distant, unmoved. They wrote him off as a man who'd had the feeling burned out of him, and the brass started drafting his retirement papers, because a silent admiral is, apparently, worse than no admiral at all. I didn't know any of that the first time I saw him. I just saw a tall gray man standing alone at the edge of my work bay at 2 in the morning, watching me replace a coupling on his own ship's coil, and I figured he was an engineer checking my work, so I said, without looking up, it's the secondary seal. Somebody over-torqued it at the last yard, and it's been leaking pressure into the housing for about a year. Cheap feeks. I just wanted you to see it before I close the panel back up, in case your last crew tries to tell you it's something fancier. He didn't answer for so long, I thought maybe he didn't speak my language. Then he said, "You're talking to me like I'm someone who needs to know that." "You are someone who needs to know that," I said. "It's your ship." He looked at the seal a long moment, and then he looked at me, and something moved behind his eyes that I didn't have a name for yet. He nodded once and walked off into the dark of the dock, and I went back to my coupling and didn't think much more of it, because that's the job too. You fix the thing in front of you, and you let the rest go. Except he came back the next night, and the night after that. He'd stand at the edge of the bay with his hands behind his back, not talking, just watching me work, and after the first week I started talking anyway, because silence makes me restless and because, frankly, it felt rude not to. I told him what I was doing and why, the way I'd talk to any junior tech leaning over my shoulder. I told him the coil sang flat because the resonance dampers were original parts, 20 years out of spec, and nobody had flagged it because nobody on the ship apparently looked past the checklist. I told him a ship is just a body with worse manners, and you fix bodies the same way no matter whose name is stenciled on the hull, patiently, and without pretending the small stuff doesn't matter. One night, about 3 weeks in, he stood there longer than usual, and when I finally straightened up to stretch my back, he asked, out of absolutely nowhere, "Does it bother you, fixing the same failures over and over, knowing they'll happen again?" It wasn't really a question about engines. I knew that the second he asked it, but I answered the engine part first, because that's what he'd given me to work with. "Sure," I said. "Things were down." "That's not failure. That's just what being used does to a thing. The failure would be pretending it's not going to happen and not checking." I wiped my hands on my rag. "You asking me about the ship or about something else?" He didn't answer that night, but the question had a shape to it I recognized, the shape of a man checking whether it was safe to ask a second one. In between, there were nights he didn't say anything useful at all, and I let those be too. One night he asked me how I'd ended up out here, 6 years from anywhere that knew my name, and I told him the truth, that I'd been a mechanic on 3 different stations before this one, that I liked the work because a busted coupling doesn't care about your rank or your accent or whether you went to the right schools. It just needs the right hands on it. He listened to that the way he listened to everything, careful and quiet, like he was filing it away somewhere he meant to come back to. Another night, he stood there for almost an hour without speaking while I rebuilt a pump housing, and when I finally asked if he wanted to sit down instead of hovering like a ghost, he said he didn't trust himself to sit still, that standing kept something in him moving that he was afraid would stop otherwise. I told him I was fine, that some engines run better warm anyway, and he made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but wasn't nothing either. It took another 2 weeks before he told me about the colony. He told it flat, the way you'd read a manifest, no inflection, eyes on the bulkhead instead of on me. 41 ships under his command. 6 made it home. He'd given the order to hold the line a beat too long, hoping reinforcements that never came would arrive in time, and he'd watch the casualty numbers come in afterward the way you watch weather, something that had already happened, that no amount of feeling about it would unhappen. Everyone keeps asking how I feel about it, he said, as if naming the feeling fixes the order I gave. I thought about that for a second, because I didn't want to hand him something cheap. I'm not going to ask you how you feel about it, I said. I'm going to ask you how you're doing. Tonight. Right now. Standing in my bay at 2 in the morning instead of sleeping like a person who isn't carrying a fleet around in his chest. I looked at him. That's a smaller question. It's easier to answer honestly. So, how are you doing? He was quiet long enough that I went back to the coupling, because I've learned that people answer better when you're not staring at them waiting. Tired, he said finally. Tired in a way sleep doesn't touch. Yeah, I said. That tracks. That's not failure either. That's just what being used does to a person, same as the ship. I tightened the last bolt and set my wrench down. You don't have to fix it tonight. You just have to keep showing up to the bay until it starts to. I don't know exactly when word got out that the Admiral had taken to spending his nights talking to the human mechanic, but by the time it did, half the officers' mess had a theory, and none of them matched what was actually happening, which was mostly me talking about resonance dampers, and him slowly learning to answer a small honest question with a small honest answer. 3 months after that first night, the fleet doctors signed off on him resuming full command. I heard about it secondhand, the way I hear about most things that happen above deck. Nobody from the brass ever came down to thank me. There was no ceremony, no medal, no quiet pull aside in a marble hall. This dock doesn't have marble. It has grease-stained floor grates and a coffee machine that's been broken since before I got here. What happened instead was smaller, and I think it mattered more. The night before his ship shipped back out, Admiral Tharrell came down on my bay one last time, still in uniform, hands still behind his back the way he always stood. They offered me a staff position, he said, somewhere quieter. I told him no. I want the bay deck job, the real one, back out where the work is. He paused. I wanted you to be the one to know that first, since you're the one who asked the question that mattered. Good, I said and meant it. Try not to over-torque your own seals out there. Cheap mistake, expensive fix. He almost smiled, the first thing close to a smile I'd seen on him, and then he was gone up the gangway, back to a fleet that needed him in one piece more than it needed him fixed. I went back to my coupling. That's the job. You fix what's in front of you. You let the rest go, and sometimes, if you're lucky, the thing you fixed walks back out into the world standing a little straighter than it walked in.